Howdy, folks. How are you? My name is Emma Rowena Gatewood. Now, most folks just call me Granny, and I guess I've earned that name after, oh my goodness, 20-some grandchildren and working on my great-grands. So, yeah, most people that I talk to want to know how I got started hiking on this Appalachian Trail. Well, let me tell you, it all started when I was sitting in my doctor's office waiting for him to call me back for an appointment. You know how they have all them magazines there on the little table while you're sitting and waiting? Well, I picked me one up, and glory be, looked at it, National Geographic, August 1949. Well, he was nearly 5 years old. That doctor didn't change out his magazines too often, but I'm sure glad he didn't change this one out, because I picked it up and started looking. Why, my gracious, 19-page spread of colored pictures all about the Appalachian Trail. Well, let me read you just a little bit here. It says it's a soul-cheering, foot-tempting trail as wide as a Mack truck. The food is easy to come by, and the trail shelters are plentiful and spaced within a day's walk of one another. The Appalachian Trail, popularly known as the Appy Trail, is a public pathway that rates as one of the 7 wonders of the outdoorsman world. Well, I tell you, I was captivated. I didn't even hear him when they called me back to see the doctor. And I carried this back there with me, and I asked him, could I take this home with me? And I read him even one little paragraph. It said, it's planned for the enjoyment of anyone in normal good health. The trail does not demand special skill nor training to traverse. Yeah, I went home and I did some research about this here article, and come to find out, Earl Schaefer was the first man to ever hike through the Appalachian Trail. He was a World War II veteran and just had demons chasing him, got out on the trail and hiked the whole thing through and got such notoriety that they did an article on it. And since then, there was about 5 other men that had hiked it through, but ne'er a woman. And I just decided it was time for some lady folks to get out there and hike too. I didn't care if I was in my mid-60s, I was going to do it. And so I was living with my son Nelson at the time, and saving my money, working at the nursing home and babysitting the grandkids, and I decided it was in July that I was going to go up there to Maine and start at the Baxter State Park up there. I did. I hit it up there. I hit Mount Katahdin, and I figured walking south, I'd be walking downhill the whole way. Well, that won't rightly so. But I got up there, and I was in Maine in the middle of the summer. My goodness, I was swatting at them black flies and knocked my glasses plumb off. Well, I'm blind as a bat without these here glasses. And by the end of the day, I weren't seeing those white stripes that was supposed to be on the trees, the front and the back of the trees. So I got me some grub that night in a campfire, and the next day I still weren't seeing those white stripes they said supposed to be on that Appalachian Trail. I told the park rangers what my plan was. By the 3rd day, I was getting just a tad worried. And I walked into an area that evening where there was a fire built and 4 Baxter State Park rangers sitting there. They looked up at me and they said, Grandma, you's lost. Go home. I said, I was not lost, I was just misplaced. Well, they were not impressed with me. They got me on a bus back to my Ohio home, and I figured I better do a little more research and on that trail. So nearly a whole year later, I decided this time I was going to start a little earlier in May, and I was going to go down to Georgia and work my way up this time. So I got on an airplane from my Ohio home, flew down to Atlanta. In Atlanta, caught a bus to pretty little town, Jasper, Georgia. And out of Jasper, I was riding in the back of a taxi cab up the mountain to Mount Oglethorpe. Not a soul knew where I was, not one of my 11 children. And just Mabel, my cousin, and the taxi cab driver, the only people knew where I was heading. Finally got up to that top of the mountain, and I gave him a good tip, and I got all my big old bag that I packed, and I got ready to go. I looked out, and whoo, I could see hundreds of beautiful sights and beautiful mountains, and I could also see 100 spectacular ways I could die. Whoo! I was out there on my own and determined to do it. And this here pack with me, you may wonder what I carried in my pack up there on the mountain. Well, let me share with you what I carried. I made a list, and I had Vienna sausage, raisins, peanuts, bouillon cubes, and powdered milk, a tin of Band-Aids, a bottle of iodine, bobby pins, and a jar of Vicks salve. Carried a warm coat and a shower curtain. You see, that shower curtain worked as a tent if it was raining, and it worked as a pretty good mattress if I got enough leaves underneath it. Drinking water, a Swiss Army knife, flashlight, candy mints, and my pen and notebook I carried everywhere with me. I even carried some pretty little slippers and a gingham dress. Thought I might need to dress up walking through them towns to look for something to eat. But it was May the 3rd, 1955. Whew! And I was just proud to be out there on my own and starting an adventure. And that first night, well, there was a farmhouse not far off the trail, and I knocked on the door to ask the folks if I could sleep in their barn or something. It was a Miller family. They said, "Come right on in, you sleep in our house and we'll feed you supper." Boy, I thought this trail wasn't going to be bad. Until the next night, I was way up on the ridge of those tall Georgia mountains, not a soul around, and just me and my campfire, and I got bedded down and situated and started hearing a little scratching. And I thought, well, what is that going on? And looked, felt something on my chest, looked down, and there's a little old mouse sitting right on my chest. You see, I was in his territory, but there we were, looking eyeball to eyeball, two fearless creatures in the wood. Yeah, I tell you, there weren't many people up there in the Georgia mountains. And I saw one man that was out painting stripes on the front and the back of the trees. And I told him, please paint them stripes a little wider than they've got up there in Maine. We need to see where we're going. It was finally in Tennessee that I saw people. Suddenly there were people up around Newfound Gap, that big old monument they built for the presidents, and I caught a bus ride down to Gatlinburg to get some grub. It was in Tennessee. I saw my first pink dogwood, just as pretty as you please. Finally got to North Carolina and enjoyed that little town of Hot Springs. A lot of history in Hot Springs. Whoo, World War I prison camp was there. A lot of them soldiers that they captured ended up staying, and a lot of little German restaurants they built there. Well, I just loved being out, and after nearly a month, my children still had no idea where I was, not one of them. And I was afraid that one of them might try to stop me, but I wrote in my little notebook, and as I zigzagged my way between North Carolina and Tennessee, I was just planting me a crop full of memories and exploring the world in my own mind. And I wrote in my little book of the challenges and rewards, and of the wild dogs that came at night sometimes, and the campfire that I'd build to stay warm, and every now and then a fellow hikers and community folks that would come up and have a picnic, and we'd share some sausage biscuits across the table. And I guess it was one night I was talking a little too much to a group that had come around. I was in Virginia, and I'd gone down to Black Horse Gap the next day to get some supplies, and a fella pulled up beside me. He says, "You Miss Emma?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we met last night, and you were telling what your plan is. I want to write a story about you." I said, "No, sir, nobody's going to tell no story about Grandma." And he said, "Well, I have a photographer here with me, and we'd be glad to carry your old backpack up a few miles, and we've even got a nice cabin you can stay at tonight if you'd like." And I said, "Okay, well, that sounded pretty good to me, you know." So that evening I put my right hand in my left and grinned through my false teeth, and they snapped a picture of me. And here's what it said. The Roanoke Times. If you don't mind, I'm going to read it to you. "Ohio woman, 67, hiking 2,050 miles on the Appalachian Trail. A hardy soul would cringe, but this 67-year-old grandma from Ohio enjoys it. She did 20 miles from Cloverdale to Bear Hollow Gap yesterday in tennis shoes. Modestly reluctant to discuss her plans, she carries all her belongings in a sack, refusing all transportation offers along the trail. She will accept rides to nearby towns if she's taken back to the trail where she left it. The Ohio widow woman has 26 grandchildren and 2 great-grand, and today she plans to move from the Peaks of Otter area north to the James River." Well, the news was out. I didn't know it, but my news was going to spread from Los Angeles to New York City. Most towns would send a reporter to intercept me, and they'd ask me how I was doing and how I was feeling, and I figured by now I might better let my kids know where I was at. I got me some postcards and sent them, all 11 of them, got them a postcard. Now they'll know what I meant when I said I was going out for a walk. But I wonder if you know much about the history of the Appalachian Trail. Well, it was back in 1921, Benton Mackay, you know, he was a smart man, graduated Harvard, and architect. He wanted to build him a trail from one end of our country to the other, just for folks to get out and walk on. And spent about 10 years on it. By the time 1931, he was about halfway done, and his friend Avery, a lawyer, stepped in to help him. And he went and knocked on doors and asked folks that had land backing up on the AT, could they sell a little piece of it to them to get the right of way, and worked hard, these fellas did. And by 1937, right here in Gatlinburg, they came together and said it was ready. The trail was ready to get out and go on. But by 1938, the World's Fair in New York, everybody was salivating over the automobile. Why, people started buying cars, and they'd rather get out and ride up the countryside instead of walking. And then, of course, World War II came along. That kind of slowed folks down for getting out and using the trail. And then by the 50s, well, everybody's buying one of them television sets. Why, half the families in the United States owned a television set, and them young'uns were getting lazy. They'd rather sit on the rear end and watch the world go by rather than get out and walk and see things. You know, my cousin Mabel, she lived 7 miles from me, but I'd walk over to see her in the morning and walk home after we'd had a nice visit that night. But I guess I was kind of a curiosity out walking up and down the countryside. But anyway, let me get off my box and get back onto the trail with you folks. I told you I'd hit Virginia. Well, loved the Shenandoah Valley and met 2 little Boy Scouts in the Shenandoah Valley. Oh, we had a big time. They taught me how to tie knots, and I was teaching them a thing or two about camping. And then I was making really good time one morning in Virginia, and I had gotten to an area where it was kind of a straight section, and all of a sudden there is a big chain fence with barbed wire all around the top, and I could see them white strips on the trees right through the fence. They put a fence right blocking our trail. And there was a big apparatus over in one area, so I kept looking to see where I might could crawl over, and finally saw a strip where there weren't no barbed wire. So I got my bag, and I hoisted it over the top best I could, and I climbed up behind it, and when we both dropped down, whoo, there was 12 uniformed men walking straight at me. I didn't know which one of us was the more scared, them or me. Well, you see, it was a Cold War right then in our country, and they had these satellites manning the air for attack. They didn't know an old grandma was going to be sneaking up on them. I told them I was not pleased with them blocking off a part of the trail, and they weren't too pleased with me either, I reckon, for interrupting them. So I got on my way and kept high-footing it. Got to Harper's Ferry. Oh, and that area with so much history. And then George Washington State Park. Don't know if any of you have been there, but boy, got to see the first monument there for the father of our country. And I was sitting there resting and felt a tap on my shoulder. It was one of the state park rangers. Said, there's somebody wanting to interview you back at the ranger station. Come on with me. Sure enough, I just didn't know what all the fuss was about, but there's more newspaper men, and this time came out in Boonesboro, Maryland, July the 8th. After 66 days and nearly 1,000 miles, Miss Emma Gatewood is pretty determined to become the first woman ever to hike the AT alone. Even if she is a 67-year-old widow woman, at the rate she's a-going, she'll make it to Maine in September, lugging a pack of 35 pounds and spending the nights in her sleeping bag or lean-to shelter along the way. She's worn out 2 pairs of shoes, but none of her enthusiasm. Well, guess they got most of it right, but not all. My bag never did weigh 35 pounds, maybe 25, and I didn't know if I ever was going to make it to Maine in September if people didn't keep stopping me. And then there was another part they didn't get right either. You see, they kept calling me a widow woman when really I was a divorcee. Yeah, I was 19 years old when I met P.C. Gatewood, and he was certainly an eligible bachelor, several years older than me, and he'd done graduated college and was teaching school. Fine figure of a man, I thought. We'd been married close to 3 months. And I just found out we were expecting our first baby, first time he hit me hard. I thought he'd broken a tooth out. And I figured, well, I better just go on back to Mama. I can't stay here. But I was the oldest of 15 young'uns. And I know my mama didn't need me, plus me bringing another young'un back to her house. So I just kept trying to please PC, and he bought a farm eventually, and we'd work out with our farm hands, and then I'd come in and spread a table for 16 people, and I'd think things were fine, and just like that, he'd go off in a tangent, and I'd try to run and hide off in the woods, but I don't know how many ribs that man broke on me, and 11 kids later, 31 years later, my youngest son saw his daddy throw me down, and Nelson was 15 when he ran and grabbed his daddy and pulled him off of me. He said, "Mama, run, go and hide, get out of here." And I did. I went to the woods and hid, and finally Nelson came and said, "Daddy's gone, Mama." I told Nelson that night, "I'm done, son. I'm way past done. I'm calling the sheriff." I did. Sheriff came over and I told him what PC'd been doing to me and how he could see my face was all bruised up. He said, "Miss Gatewood, you must have done something to aggravate your husband. Yeah, I'm going to take you down to the jailhouse." I spent the night in the jail that night, but at least I was safe. I knew nobody was going to hurt me. And the next morning, that sheriff and his wife, they came to visit me in the jailhouse, and they said, "Miss Emma, we've been talking to your neighbors. We know you've been in trouble for a while. You can stay at our house till you figure out something to do. There's the kind folks." And I did. That's when I divorced PC. And that's been years ago, and I guess that's one reason I feel so safe and so grand just hiking out in the woods. It's a balm to my wounded soul. You know, I wake up in the morning and I see them wildflowers peeking up at me, or a little critter running around, and I feel like they're my closest friends. Well, I'm getting off track, but thanks for letting me share that piece of my story with you. Yeah, I made it to Pennsylvania, 230 miles of Pennsylvania. Whew, that's a rough state. I remember walking uphill in one section and lots of rocks, and I heard a commotion behind me and turned around, and well, it was a big old gentleman coming up, says, "Are you Miss Emma? I've been reading about you." I said, "Well, I am." He said, "I want to know what kind of birds you done seen on the trail." He's a bird watcher. We sat and talked about all the birds I done seen on the trail. Finally made it to New Jersey, and I'd gone down to one of the little towns to get some supplies, and a police car pulled up. "You Miss Gatewood?" I said, "Oh, what have I done?" They said, "It's not a thing, but somebody back at the police station is on the phone and wants to talk to you." Well, it was somebody by the name of Mary Snow, sweetest little lady. She was a writer for Sports Illustrated. She said, "Miss Emma, can I walk with you?" I said, "Oh, sure, baby, come on." She and I walked across the Hudson Bay Bridge together. She's just writing away in her notepad, and we shared a good many days together. Got to New England, and yeah, I remember Connecticut. Not many miles in Connecticut, but it's a pretty little state. Met some Girl Scout troops and had the best time, and I remember I was looking for a place to eat, and I saw a couple little girls playing tennis, and asked them where was a good place to eat there in their town. They said, "At my house." I said, "Oh, I can't go to your house." They said, "Well, Mama's frying chicken." I said, "Well, maybe I can." So I followed them home, and we had the best time fixing to leave, and their daddy came home, pulled up, and he kind of frowned at me. He said, "You wait right there." He ran in the house and came back out with that copy of Sports Illustrated. He said, "I'd know you anywhere, Miss Emma." I was beginning to feel like a celebrity. I tell you I was. Now, 1955 was some of the worst year for storms. Connie, followed by Diana, little town in Massachusetts that I walked through. Why, 2 days after I got through there, 200 people had passed, all from the floods. The waters were so high, the parents tied their youngins to the top of trees to keep them from getting washed away. It was just bad. And if any of you are hikers, you know how bad it is to hike in the rain. why the trails just turn into riverbeds, and the riverbeds turn into like an ocean. And that's what it was doing all through New England. I made it to one area, was up around Vermont, and it was raining so bad I saw kind of a lean-to near an old logging camp, and I went in and built a fire and was trying to dry off some of my stuff, and two big old fellas came in. They were actually Marines. They said they were on a 2-week leave and taking a break and doing some hiking, and they came in to get out of the rain, and we shared some grub over that night, and the next morning I got up, thought they were still sleeping. Got to one area where it was a good-sized river, but with all the rain, it had swollen so high, there's no way I could cross it. So I just sat down on a log looking at it and thinking maybe somebody come after a while. Well, sure enough, a couple hours these two young men came by, and they looked at the river too and kind of shook their head. They said, I don't know what we're going to do to get across here. We looked at ways we could get up higher, and there wasn't any way. One of the men finally had some parachute cord, and he got out his parachute cord and he wrapped it around himself, and then got me over here beside him and wrapped it around me. And the third fella's over here, you see, and got it wrapped around him. So they said, okay, we've made us an Emma sandwich and we're going to head out. So we started, and before we knew it, it was up to our knees, our waist, up to our chest just about. And I knew if one of us made the wrong step, we'd all three be gone. But somehow or other, we made it over and fell onto the side of the riverbank, just thanking the good Lord we was still breathing. We exchanged addresses before they took off, and for year after year, that sweet old fella, he'd send me a postcard saying, do you remember our Emma sandwich? We survived. Well, the rain kept coming, just kept coming, and a few days later, still in Vermont, I saw a shelter with some smoke coming out the top, and I figured, well, there's somebody got a fire going. I stuck my head in, and oh my goodness, there must have been, I don't know how many men folk, 2 of them wearing clerical collars, and another 8 or 10 fellers. And I said, well, I can't go in there. They said, well, honey, it's too wet outside, come on in. And they were cooking some corn pone and smelled mighty good. So I settled in with that group, and I'd heard there was all kinds of racial tension, in the South. But these young men were just so kind to me, and one of the fellas kept patting me on the shoulder, asking me if I was all right. And the next morning we headed out together, and again, them big old rivers just flooding. I got on the back of the fella that had been so nice to me, and nearly, I think, choked him. I was riding piggyback, and he helped me across the creek. I found out a few months later there were 2 gangs from Harlan up there that the Catholic Church had brought to try to bring together, and I guess they came together over their old white grandma, trying to get her up the trail. Oh, fine folks they were, and finally made it to New Hampshire. And the thing I remember about New Hampshire, them white mountains. And just a heartbeat. They're kind of like PC Gatewood. They could change in a heartbeat, and be so cold and snow. But made it through them and met the Thompson family. They had 3 boys, and Miss Thompson really took care of me for a few days, and we did some cooking, and come to find out, 2 years later, her husband, Mr. Thompson, became the governor of New Hampshire. I knew him before he even knew he was going to be governor. I was right proud. Finally, finally, I tell you, I hit that 14th state. Whew, gone through about 6 pair of shoes and lost a whole lot of weight till my clothes was bagging on me. And it wasn't no fanfare when I hit that last state. It was just a beautiful bed of moss laying out there in front of me. Whew, I went and I laid down and I looked up. It was twilight, looked up at the sky. And, you know, what are those moments when you feel so important and so insignificant all at the same time? And I just felt like I could reach out and touch the stars maybe that night. And I started thinking about all the weeks I'd been on the trail. And, you know, I could almost see the little kids around their kitchen table cutting out pictures of Grandma Gatewood in her newspaper as she tromped up and down the hillside. And I could see them sitting in front of their TV set watching the evening news, me traipsing across the bottom of the TV set. I tell you, I just kind of felt like all of the United States was cheering me on. And I guess a good part of them were, because well, Miss Mary Snow connected back with me. You see, I was back up in Maine with them big old black flies, and I fell and bumped up one knee, and I broke my glasses again, and she was determined she's going to get them fixed for me. And finally, I hit the very end of the trail, Mount Katahdin. I touched the sign, and you know what I did when I stopped there? I just stopped and held on to that sign, and I sang America the Beautiful, because it was just a beautiful place that I'd been those last few months. Just knowing, getting to know folks, them Appalachian folks way down in the south, to them folks up in the north that talk kind of funny with an accent. Didn't matter. They just were right, kind and neighborly to me. And I was so thankful that I'd been able to go and accomplish that task. And I had such a good time out there that 2 years later I did it again. And then when I was 70, I section hiked it again. I guess once your feet start moving, it's hard to stop them sometimes. But my daddy always told me, Emma girl, if you have a goal, put your mind to it and pick up your feet high. You'll get there. Just pick up your feet high. Thank you.